Hey, Shelley said.
Hi, Shelley. I'm Tyler. Yeah.
Tyler
Owens. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're
So
welcome.
appreciate it.
I hope it's clear. Are you guys going to be able to see? I'm right like smacking your way, aren't I?
Can you see the screen, Anthony? Come on this side of me.
You could maybe move down one or sit over there. Yeah. Make sure you can see. Well, is everybody ready to learn about the Electoral College? All right. I'm Tyler, and thanks for coming out, everybody. I know there was some confusion about the time, and if you have to leave, I'm not going to be offended at all. I'll try to get through everything as quickly as I can, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Let's start out. What I want you to do in your minds, I want you to go back in time with me to a time when when this flag, nobody in the world knew about this flag. Maybe it existed, but nobody knew what it was. There was no America. There was no Statue of Liberty, no Empire State Building, no Lincoln Memorial, no Jefferson Memorial, no Mount Rushmore.
No Pokemon.
There was no Nashville, Tennessee. There was not even a Spring Hill, Tennessee at the time. And America was just a group of colonies, states. They thought of themselves as little countries on the eastern edge of a vast, huge, unexplored wilderness with just trees and animals and Native Americans everywhere. But this little group of people had just recently broken away from the most powerful nation on earth in Britain and said, you know what, we don't want to be associated with you. We're going to be our own country. And so they had realized the representatives of these colonies have realized, wait a minute, if we're going to make this work, we're going to have to get together and form some sort of government that we can all be under. Now, they all wanted to maintain their own sovereignty, but they needed some sort of overarching system. So what they were going to have to do is create a system of government custom built from the ground up that would cover all of them. And these guys were smart guys. They had studied history. They had studied the Greeks and the Romans and all the different government systems in history. And they thought, you know what? Let's take all the best elements from all these different systems and let's avoid all the different problems that all these different systems have had if we can. And the only requirements for this system was that it had to protect our citizens, protect the freedom of our citizens from tyranny. Tyranny of every kind. Tyranny from some sort of king. Tyranny from some sort of mob rule. You know, the French Revolution was going to happen in a few years right after this time period. And they were terrified of that. And so they got together and they came up with a system. And here we are 240 years later, and it seems to have worked. We're still here, and America is the place on the earth where people who want freedom go. Where else in the world do people who want opportunity go but America? And one of the main ways that we control how things that happen in our country or influence how things happen in our country is through voting. And that's the way the founders set it up. So that's why we're going to talk about it. So first, let's talk about who can vote. There's rules, right? Is anybody in here 18 years or older? A couple of people. Natural born or naturalized citizens. So you can move here, become a citizen, and vote. But if you don't become a citizen, you can't vote. In Tennessee, you have to be a resident of a Tennessee county, and then you have to be registered to vote in that county. So you have to go to the election commission or several different processes and be registered to vote. If you're not registered to vote, you can cast a provisional ballot. In Tennessee, you have to show a photo ID. You have to have an ID with your picture on it. Because in 2013, they passed a law that said you can't vote unless you show a picture that says, hey, this is me. Come on in, guys. And you can find all that out about all those rules and everything at the Tennessee Secretary of State's website. The Secretary of State, this organization, his group is the one that runs all these things for our state. Well, let's save your questions for later, okay? Save it for the end there. So, now, what people can vote. The Founding Fathers, when they created this country, they didn't think that everybody should just be able to vote. They thought that only people that owned land should be able to vote. So initially, only landowners could vote. And it wasn't until 1856 that all men could vote. Any men, whoever they were, could vote. All white men, sorry about that. 1920, it wasn't until 1920 that all women could vote. Did anybody know who this is?
No.
Is that Jackie Roberts?
No, it's Jim Thorpe.
Oh.
He was a famous American athlete. He was a Native American. 1947, they passed a law that all members of Native American tribes were actually citizens, so now they could vote. And then in 1964, a law was passed that did away with poll taxes. Now in the South, in the 60s and 50s and 30s and 40s, if you were black and you wanted to go vote, sometimes you'd have to be required to pay a tax before you could vote. It's called a poll tax. And that meant a lot of black people couldn't vote at all. And so it was a way of keeping African Americans from being able to vote. In 1964, they said, no more of that. Now, everybody in the country, if you're a citizen, you're 18 and older, you can vote. And one of the biggest thing that we're going to talk about today is who the president is, who's going to be the president. But I want to take a second and talk about the name, the word president. Now, to us, president means like king. I mean, it's a really elevated title. But when the founders came up with this name, decided on this name, they had big debates about this, and just on and on and on about, well, do we call him a king? No, we don't want to do that. Do we call him your excellency? Well, that kind of seems a little frou-frou. So they decided, you know what, we're going to pick the lowest level title that we can think of. And president at that time meant just the guy that sat at the meeting and said, all right, guys, let's get started. Hand out these papers. It was the low, and my daughter came up with the thing. She said it'd be as if we called the leader of America the manager. Some people freaked out. They were like, wait a minute, you can't call him president. This guy's got to go all around the world signing treaties and representing us. But now, many, many countries have presidents. I don't know if anybody reads Russian, but that's what president is in Russian. There's 147 countries now have presidents, where they didn't before. Now everybody wants to be the president. There are over 4,000 elected offices in the state of Tennessee. And I estimated some of these. These are actually pretty low estimates because Williamson County has 12 county commissioners. So I used the number 6 as an average. These are all the folks that have to be elected in our state to run the state. You know, the governor, of course, state senators, all these guys, sheriffs, district attorneys, school board members. Everybody in this room is represented by a senator, or 2 senators, a congressman in Washington, a state representative, a state senator, a school board member, and then, of course, there's the county commission or city commission if you live in the city. The state's divided up into counties. Each one of these counties, like here's Murray County, here's Williamson County, we're right in here somewhere.
We're in the exact middle.
That's right. Each one of these counties has a mayor, has a county commission. The Senate, there's 33 state senators that represent you in Nashville. They go to Nashville and get together and make laws. There's a state House of Representatives, and those are all the districts. I'm pretty sure these people do have a representative here. For some reason, it's not covered in. And then,
Just like no.
yeah, and then there's the Congress. So these are the guys. There's a congressman that represents each of these districts here, or a member of Congress, I guess they say now. And those folks go to Washington and represent you. All those people have to be elected. We talked earlier about the political parties. In our country now, there are 2 main political parties. I'm sure you've all heard of them. And this is a nonpartisan presentation, so I'm not favoring one or the other. But really, there are only 2 really big parties that have a chance of getting elected president. But there are a lot more parties than that. There's a Communist Party. There's a Socialist Party. There's a Green Party, a Constitutional Party. I think it's the owl over there. There's a marijuana party. If you like that sort of thing.
What's the
Sounds
owl
like
on
something
that,
just
Dean?
full of college students.
What'd you say?
I saw an owl on that.
I think that's the Constitutional Party symbol. I don't know if anybody here is a fan of the Constitutional Party. So what do the parties do? The political parties are informal organizations. There are no rules about how parties are formed. The legislature doesn't tell. It's all citizen organized. It's all the people getting together and saying, hey, we're going to have a political party and here's how we're going to organize it. So like in Tennessee, there's a Tennessee Democratic Party, there's a Tennessee Republican Party. They all have leadership. And what they do, this is where the real elections start. We were talking about this earlier. This is where the real choosing of who is going to be the leadership happens, is at the party level, especially for the president. So when it comes time to pick who's going to be president, the states will have primary elections. Some of them will have primaries and some of them will have caucuses. And they'll make a ballot and they'll say, all right, all you Republicans out there in the state, go to your voting precincts and tell us who you think should be president, our candidate for president, the Republican candidate for president. So you'll go into this voting booth and you'll pick somebody, Ben Carson or Donald Trump or Rand Paul or whoever. And then in some states you actually pick the delegates that are going to go and at the party and decide these things. So you can actually vote. This is Hamilton County. You had to vote for 14 people that were going to go from Hamilton County to the Tennessee Republican Party convention. Some states have caucuses to decide who's going to be the nominee for the party. So the Republican Party will have a caucus. This is in Iowa. They all go to this gymnasium all over the state. They'll go to a gymnasium, and in this situation, if you want this guy to be the candidate, you stand on this side of the room. If you want this guy to be the candidate, you stand on this side of the room. Then they count everybody up, and at the end of it, they say, okay, this guy's going to be our nominee. And then, once all these parties do all this at the grassroots level, here in Murray County, Williamson County, every county in the Tennessee, but all the counties in the rest of the country, they send those. They tell the state party, hey, the Tennessee Republican Party wants this guy to be the nominee for president, and the Democrat Party of Tennessee wants this person to be the nominee. So those people will go to a meeting somewhere in the country, it usually happens in July, that they call a convention. So the Democrats will have their convention, Republicans will have their convention, the Green Party will have, the Libertarian Party will have their convention, and all these delegates from all over the country come there and they have this big meeting, and they all do it basically the same way. They stand in a room, see these signs here? California, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma. Let's say we're at the Democrat convention this year, and you got all the representatives of the states, and they have a big roll call, and they say, all right, this is the first ballot. Oklahoma, who do you cast your votes for? And somebody from Oklahoma stands up and said, the great state of Oklahoma casts its votes for whoever, this guy. And then the next state, Florida, the state of Florida casts its votes for this person. So they total all those votes up, and at the end, if they've got a majority, they say, the Democratic Party of America wants, Bernie Sanders to be our candidate, or Hillary Clinton. And across town at the Republican convention, they say, we want Ted Cruz, or we want Donald Trump to be the candidate. Once that happens, once the conventions choose their candidate, then the state says, they're listening and say, okay, who do you want to be the candidate? The state says, okay, these are the people we're going to put on the ballot. And it's all done by the people. It's all done by the will of the people. You guys decide all that. Now you'll hear this term. Maybe some of y'all may not hear this enough, but you ever hear the term brokered convention? Typically what happens when they get together for the convention, everybody votes, and they have one ballot, and there's a majority winner. Whoever that is becomes the candidate. But if there's not a clear majority, they take a second ballot. And once they start that second ballot, all bets are off and anybody can vote for anybody they want. And so there can be a lot of wrangling and political, politicking that goes on, and say, I want you to vote for me, and if you do this, I'll give your state this, or whatever. Or they'll say, I don't want that guy to be president unless my buddy over here can be vice president. And they come up with some sort of plan. It's only happened a few times. But you have a brokered convention where the guy that comes out as the nominee and the vice presidential nominee weren't necessarily the ones that were elected by the majority of the people in the states. Now, all that's over with. The parties have said, The Republican Party candidate is this person. The Democrat Party candidate is this person. All the other parties choose their candidates. And then they start campaigning across the country to see who's going to be president. So this is Kennedy. You know, they go to diners and they go to workplaces. You'll see it on TV. Hillary Clinton going around shaking hands at the local donut shop, you know, and Ted Cruz shaking hands at the construction site with whoever, or Donald Trump doing the same thing. And they go and they campaign, and they're trying to get the people to vote for them, because what they want to do is they want to win the majority of votes in each of these key states that they're in. But all of that voting happens at what's called the precinct level, just like in the primaries. And I'll show you what that means. Here's a map. This is Williamson County. So this is the county just north, you know, here. But it's divided into these county commission districts. Like here's one down here. This is District 2. Okay? But in District 2, this little area right here is precinct number 4, 2-4, which is the second district, the fourth precinct of the second district. So people in this district, this precinct, vote on who they want to be president. You got the Republican candidate, the Democrat candidate, the whatever party. They say, I want this person to be president. They total up all those votes. The precinct counts their votes, and they send that to the county election commission. County counts up all those votes. They total up all those votes, and they send it to the states. The state election commission, the Secretary of State, counts all that up, and he gives the electors. He said, I'm going to award the state of Tennessee's electors to somebody. And this is where the Electoral College comes into it. And once Congress counts up all these votes from the states, they award the electors to the different candidates, and then you get the president-elect. And that's the person that has gotten the most of the Electoral College votes. So let's talk about what the Electoral College is. I used a picture of a building. It's not a building. So just, if you could, just don't think about a building. We hear the word college and we think of where you go to take classes, but it's just, college means where people get together to decide something or to do something, all right? So, when the founders set it up, what they wanted to do was they wanted to have representatives from each of these states go to Washington, not go to Washington, but go to their state capital and vote on who would be president. And they, in their minds, in their thinking, you pick the prominent guys, the most prominent people in the state, and they could be anybody, and they didn't tell the states who they could be. Anybody, as long as they were voters, and they could vote on who the president was going to be. So, each state, let's say, here's Tennessee, right?
California has 55.
They do, yes. Each state gets 2 electors. An elector means somebody who elects, right? Each state gets 2 electors because they have 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators. And then they get an elector for every member of Congress that they have. So Tennessee has 2 senators and 9 congressmen. So they get 11 electors. So Tennessee gets 11 people, 11 votes in who's going to be president. All right? So this is completely separate from the popular election. This is completely separate from what happened in the primaries. At this point, Tennessee gets 11 votes on who's going to be president. California gets 55 votes. They get 2 senators, and they have 53 congressmen, because there's way more people that live in California. So they get 55 electoral votes. Texas gets 34, Florida 27. I don't know what this state is. What is this state? Wyoming. They get 3.
I knew
Okay.
Wyoming too.
What's that? That's South Dakota, right?
Yes.
They get 3.
They
So this is the way it looks. If you see these little blocks, these represent the electoral votes. So there's 9 electoral votes. Here's 55. Here's Wyoming. There's Wyoming's 3 votes. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So there's 538 total electoral votes. It's as if there are 538 people who are going to vote on president. To become president, 270 of these people have to vote for you. Okay? So 270 is the magic number. It's the majority plus, or 50% plus 1. And if you get that many electoral votes, you get to be president. In the last election, here's how it worked out. The blue is, these folks voted for Barack Obama. The red states, the Reds, these folks voted for Mitt Romney.
What about Hawaii
So-
did it?
This is how it broke down. As the votes came in, as the states totaled up their votes and said, okay, the majority of people in our state voted for Barack Obama, we give our electoral votes to Barack Obama. Our electors are going to vote for Barack Obama. They total them up at the end. Obama had 332 electoral votes. Romney had 206. Obama becomes president. A little bit different in 2000. George Bush versus Al Gore. The red states went for Gore. The blue, these are the ones that voted for George Bush. Al Gore, if you look at this number, 50 million votes. Al Gore got 50 million votes. Bush got 49 million votes. Okay? So he lost the popular election. But if you add up all the states that cast their votes, their electoral votes for George Bush, he got 271, so he becomes president, regardless of what the popular vote is.
So it's the more states, not numbers?
It's not the individual votes, you're right. This was the, Lincoln and Douglas election. So Lincoln's electoral votes totaled up to enough for him to win. At this time, of course, there wasn't 270. But we all know that Lincoln became president this time. Okay? Does that make sense? I mean, I know it's... You've heard of swing states. So what this system does, because you need to get these numbers, right? You've got to total them up. And they sit down and they write these numbers down. We think we can carry these states. We know we're going to get these states. And we think we might be able to get that state. Oh my goodness, it adds up to 282 votes. I'm going to be president, you know. These states right here are what are called swing states. So the red ones are states that we know are always going to go Republican. The light red ones, they're maybe. The blue ones, these states are always going to go Democrat, and these might. But these states, man, they're up in the air.
They're
I might win
independent.
these. I might win these. They're called swing states. They could swing either way. They could swing Republican or Democrat.
They're independent.
Well, it has to do with the way people have voted in the past in these states. And so the people that run campaigns go, man, I think we might be able to win Nevada. So they go and they campaign in Nevada, or they campaign in Iowa. Why would anybody go to Colorado if it was just popular election?
One party that might go to Colorado.
Why would they go to Colorado? Because there's only 9 electoral votes there. And the population may be even smaller than that. But because of the way it is, they need those 9 votes. They go to those different states to get those. So that's what swing states are. Does that make sense? So you're campaigning to win the electoral votes of the individual states.
The one in blue means that they voted for Democrats mostly.
Well, it changes colors from year to year, but yeah, it just shows which candidate got which votes. So let's look at who the electors are. Electors are people who elect. So these are the people in the Founders' Vision who are actually going to elect the president. They said it should be prominent citizens, but it could be anybody. There are absolutely no rules about who the electors have to be. The Founders wanted to have direct elections. The electors can change their vote. So the way it is now, the electors are pledged to vote for, the Republican electors are pledged to vote for Mitt Romney or whatever. The Democrats are pledged to vote for Al Gore. But they could change their vote if they wanted to.
Yeah, like independents can vote for anyone.
There are state laws in 27 states that say the electors are sworn to vote for the party, the candidate of the party that they're from. And there's laws that say if you don't do that, you can be prosecuted. No one's ever been prosecuted.
What's a prosecutor?
Arrested and put in jail. So in the 1800s, though, the way it happened is the political parties became powerful, and the Republic of the Whigs and the Democrats started to organize and say, you know what, we got to take control of this process of who gets to be the electors, and we're going to decide who these people are going to be, and we're going to make sure that they're going to be people who are going to vote for our nominee for president. And so they took over and they started creating these systems within the states, and it's all perfectly legal. None of it's unconstitutional, and it's all very grassroots. and they started saying, okay, we're going to really strictly control who gets to be the nominee for our state. So, for example, in this election, Romney versus Barack Obama, when you went to the polling place, you saw this list. I don't know if you remember seeing this, but you're voting for the electors for Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, and the electors for Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Because of that electoral system, in this state, in Tennessee, more people voted for the electors for Mitt Romney than for Barack Obama. And so, these people, these are all members of the Republican Party of Tennessee. You could meet them today. You could call them on the phone and say, hey, you're an elector, aren't you? Yes, I am. So these people all went to the state capitol and officially cast their vote for Mitt Romney as president. And then the state election commissioner took that ballot, wrote all that down, and sent it to Washington, to Congress. Congress gathers all those from all over the country, and they count them up, and they say, okay, Oregon gave their votes to Barack Obama, Idaho gave their votes to Mitt Romney. And they total it all up, and then they say, all right, here's who's going to be president. Barack Obama is the president-elect. Now, why would they create a system like that? Go ahead.
I've heard the phrase winner take all.
Yes.
Is that in the primary?
That's in the Electoral College vote. So winner take all. Tennessee is a winner take all state. Yeah, it is.
My mom said it isn't.
Well, okay. Maybe I misunderstand what winner take all means. Winner take all means that, for example, in Tennessee, Mitt Romney got the majority of votes for president in that election, so he gets all the electoral votes. In some states, there's 2 states that divide it up. They split it up proportionally. So I can't remember what states they are, but they'll get 3 go to this guy and 2 go to that guy. So most states are winner take all. So why did the founding fathers create such a bizarre system? Why didn't they just total up all the votes and say this guy got most of the votes and this guy lost? Well, there's a lot of debate about that. But if you look at this is the population of the colonies at the time, and this is how they were laid out. The seat of government, the middle of government, where all this was happening, was in. Oh, hold on! Don't look at that! Don't look at that!
What?
No, don't look at that!
Did the government?
Don't be distracted by the drone. No!
What is this, electronic class?
Now we got to the right one.
There we go. Okay. This is where Philadelphia was, kind of right smack in the middle of the colonies, and it was horrible to travel in those days. They didn't have highways, they didn't have shock absorbers on their carriages. To get from Georgia to Philadelphia was a really rough trip. If you were a candidate and you wanted to be president and you lived in Georgia, you couldn't get to Philadelphia, much less get to Maine very quickly. It would take forever. So they decided, you know what? There's no way the common man is going to get to know who all the candidates are and really make a wise decision. So we're going to let the smartest people in Georgia figure this out. And then they'll vote and send their ballot to Philadelphia or New York or wherever it ended up being, or Virginia, Washington, D.C. Because it was just such travel was horrible in those days and communication was terrible. So they wanted a system where the most qualified person would get elected, not the most popular person. Just hold your question until the end there. Okay, the drone.
Now we get to the.
Imagine a drone with 3 rotors, right? If any one of these rotors fails, the whole thing crashes, right? Or if any one of these motors starts running too fast, it just flipped the whole thing over, right? So, the founding fathers realized that there was 3 sources of power, 3 competing interests that they were having to balance with this whole forming a government thing. There was the will of the people, the will of all you voters. There was the will of the states, and these people that represented these states were very concerned that their interests were represented because they thought of themselves as sovereign groups. And like I was saying earlier, they went to this convention. A lot of them went to it thinking, well, I'm going to go participate in this thing, but I'm not sure I really like what's going on. And anytime somebody said, well, the states had to give up authority, they were like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're sovereign countries. We're not going to give up our authority. That's why there's the 10th Amendment. And then, of course, there was the federal government. So they knew we got to have some sort of overarching system that draws us all together and rules for how we operate with each other. So they had to use all these competing interests. And so they came up with this system of government that's in our Constitution. I've got my Constitution in the briefcase over there. You guys are familiar with this idea here? You don't know what the executive branch is. Who knows what the executive branch is? Anybody? President. Yeah, there you go. What about the judicial branch? Courts? You don't know about the courts?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. And all the other courts. The legislative branch makes the laws, the House and the Senate. And I need a little graphic here that shows that. So they came up with this system, and each of these systems check and balance each other. They don't want any one of them to get out of control and take over. But even as they created it, they knew they had to have somebody pulling the levers of government every day, somebody up there making the decisions. So while they used all these principles of protecting the interests of the states and the federal government and the people in deciding how the government would be run, they wanted to bring that same principle into choosing the president. And so that's why the Founding Fathers did that. They were at the convention in 1796, 86, and they were debating, and they had thrashed all this stuff out. They had created this custom-made system of government from the ground up. And they got to the end, and they're like, how are we going to pick this guy who's going to be pulling the levers, driving the bulldozer? We got to have some system for that. And they debated. They fought about it. How are we going to do this? And someone would say, we should let the people elect. No, we can't do that. They'll go crazy and pick some idiot. So they said, look, this is the end of the convention. We're so sick of debating. They picked a committee of 11 guys, the committee of 11. They said, y'all go in a room over there, and you figure this out. And whatever y'all come up with, we'll vote on it, and that's what we'll do. So these guys went off in the room, and you can read all the records of the debates and everything and how they thrashed it out. And they came out of that room. They came out of that room and said, all right, here's the system we came up with. And they looked at it. We're going to create this Electoral College. And they looked at it and go, okay, we can go with that. It was the closest thing that they could come up with to a popular vote that all of the representatives of the states would approve at that time. So they created it. And that's why they did it. And look, these guys knew all about popular elections. They knew how elections ran. They looked at all those different options and said, let's come up with this thing. Now, it sounds crazy to us, but it makes sense. It made sense at the time. So, why do we keep it? First of all, it's hard. Yeah, that's right. First of all, it's hard to change the Constitution. Very hard to do that. It seems to work. For 240 years, we've had elections, and we've had, 57? 56 elections.
It's going to be 57 soon.
That's right. We've had no coup. You know what a coup d'etat is? Anybody know what a coup d'etat is?
A revolution.
A revolution, where somebody takes over the government. And you'll see a news report that says, forces of the military of whatever state took over Washington, D.C. and installed their guy as president today. This happens all the time all over the world. Thailand, all these other countries. We have never had it happen in our country, thankfully. You ever heard of this concept of peaceful transfer of power? In a lot of countries, I'm the ruler, and I want to be the ruler forever, and I'm never going to give my power to somebody else. I may pick my son and make him the ruler, like in South Korea or something. But the Founding Fathers created a system.
North Korea.
North Korea, sorry.
Is
North Korea.
Democratic, I believe.
North Korea, right. The peaceful transfer of power. So our Founding Fathers created this system, and it works here, and now it's been replicated all over the world. I don't know if you've noticed that, but people all over the world have figured out how to have a peaceful transfer of power without having to have all these wars. So that's what we do. And then what it has provided is stability. Okay, you can go. So, stability. Now, lest we think that the whole rest of the world elects their leaders by popular election, let me talk about some of the other countries. Any country that was ever associated with Britain usually has a parliament. Canada, Australia. And in Britain, whoever's the head of the biggest party in what they call the House of Commons, which is the popularly elected group, that guy is the head of government. He's called the Prime Minister. So in England, the Prime Minister is the head of government. It would be in our situation as if Paul Ryan was the head of government because he's the head of the House of Representatives. In Russia, they elect the president by popular election. Just whoever gets the popular vote. Right now it's Vladimir Putin. In India, the head of government is elected by the legislature of I can't remember what they call it, but the legislature of India and representatives of 2 of the states of India. And they elect the guy that's going to be the head of government. And then in Germany, the Bundestag, which is basically the House of Representatives, and the members of the state legislatures of Germany, Bavaria and all these other ones, they elect the president, and he appoints the chancellor, which right now is Merkel. So that's the way it works in the rest of the world. The pros and cons. Why is it good? Why is it bad? Wait, these are flipped, aren't they? No, these are the pros. The proponents of the Electoral College say it promotes coalition building, where I've got to build a coalition of all these people in all these states to get their electoral votes. So I've got to go out to Colorado, and I've got to go out to Iowa and New Hampshire and Maine and visit with all these people so that I can get their electoral votes. Also, it benefits the smaller states. Why would anybody go to Wyoming just to get their 250, 500,000 votes when they can just spend all their time in California and Florida? On the other side, on the against side, why we shouldn't do it, the winner of the popular election can lose, as we saw in 2000. It's only happened 4 times in the history of our country, though. So most of the time, in the other 52 elections, the majority winner gets it. But in theory, the winner of the election could lose. And we think of it, the rest of the world looks at our system and goes, oh my gosh, if we don't understand it, how is somebody in Britain or Australia going to understand our system of selecting our president? And then there's the idea of the faithless elector. Now that means that somebody that was sworn to vote for their party's candidate changes their vote and says, know what, I'm not going to do it. In theory, all of them could do that. But as it's worked out, it's only happened something like 27 times in the whole history of our country. And it's usually only one elector, and it doesn't affect the outcome of the election, or hasn't so far.
What's the faithless elector?
So this person that Tennessee has chosen to vote for a particular presidential candidate changes their vote and says, no, you know what, I'm not going to vote for that guy. I'm going to vote for somebody else. So it happens every now and then.
You change to another guy and then you vote again.
The electors, not the popular vote. Does that make sense to y'all? The faithless elector concept?
Yeah.
He breaks his promise.
Yeah.
Like he tells you he's going to vote for Cruz, but instead of voting for Cruz, he votes for Trump.
Yeah. And in theory, they could all do it, but they don't because of that very careful selection process coming up through the state political parties as they choose these people. They know they're going to get somebody that's going to go and do what the majority of the people in that political party want them to do.
Well, 2 questions. First question, what is the election process for the electors? How do we decide? Is it literally just whoever we think is the most trustworthy and the most willing to put aside their opinions and represent the people? Or is it just people with power? Or
there is one rule. They cannot be an employee of the federal government. They can't be a federal elected official or an employee of the federal government. So, but no, other than that, there are no rules. And so the parties come up with how they pick them, the individual political parties.
Do they have to be a member? Do they have to be a citizen of the U.S.?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's assumed. They have to be a voter. I don't know. Maybe not. That's a good question. We may find out in future elections.
This was a question from one of my friends he used to live in Britain and now he lives in New Zealand. He asked, what were the advantages of a 2-stage election system versus a single-stage election?
Oh, primaries?
Yeah.
Well, in a country as big as America, England and Australia are a lot smaller. In a country as large as America, also it's a concession to state sovereignty. And the federal government said, look, y'all pick the electors. We don't care how you do it. Just tell us who the electors are just tell us who the electors are and how they voted. That's all we want to know. All right, let's finish up and then we'll have some questions. So, what is the other system that we might use other than the Electoral College? It's what's called the national popular vote. So, you saw in that one slide where they totaled up the votes for Al Gore and for George Bush. And Al Gore won and George Bush won. If we had national popular vote, whoever won that vote in that election, Al Gore would have become
So
president.
the winner can lose concept?
Yes, and it's to get rid of that idea. And what that is if whoever, and we get those totals, I mean, we have those numbers, and it would be very easy to calculate that now. It's all done electronically. So we would instantly tell who the winner of the popular vote was. And it's usually by a pretty good margin, too, thousands and thousands of votes. So there's a movement now to have what's called the national popular vote. So it's a little bit hard to understand the concept of how this would work. But what the proponents of this have done is they've gone around to the different states and they said, look, what if they wrote a law, and I've got the big giant book over here in my briefcase. They wrote a law and they said, look, if we get enough states to agree with this, will you agree to pass a law that your state's electors have to go to whoever won the national popular election? And they've had enough states now. They've got 167 electoral votes now. Enough states total up their electoral votes to say that. And so if they get a total of enough states for 270 electoral votes, all of these states have agreed to pass a law that all of their votes will go to whoever won the national popular election, not who won the state's popular election. Does that make sense? So, I wish I had my map up here of those states. It's a little bit hard to understand, but it would be so the Constitution says that the states can elect whoever, they can send these electors to whoever they want to. But the national popular vote movement is kind of an end run around the Constitution, so that we don't have to change the Constitution if all the states agree to give their electors to whoever won the popular vote. So what you would have is all of the states going to whoever won the popular vote, not some going to Mitt Romney and some going to Barack Obama.
So basically, it would be a more drastic version of winner takes all?
Yes, it would be winner takes everything. There wouldn't be divided map. They would all go to whoever won the popular vote of all the states that agree to do this. So,
do you think that would be a dangerous, a bad idea, or do you?
Well, the founders didn't think it was a good idea. So, to amend the Constitution is a convoluted and tough process. I don't know if y'all have studied that at all. But to change the Constitution, the House and the Senate, 2/3 of the Senate have to approve the amendment, 2/3 of the House have to approve the amendment, and then 3/4 of the state legislatures have to approve the amendment. Then it becomes part of the Constitution. That is can you imagine having to do that these days? I mean, you can't get 2/3 of the Congress to agree on anything.
Can you imagine having to do that during the Civil War?
Or much less 2/3 of the states agreeing on anything. The other thing to do is to have a constitutional convention, which you may have heard people call, what if we did the same thing we did in Philadelphia, but we did it now in New York, and we got representatives from all the state legislatures or whoever to come, and we're going to open up the Constitution and say, how can we just change this thing? Problem is, they haven't figured out a way to limit it to just the popular vote or just one issue or another. So we could open up the Constitution for debate and start changing all kinds of things. And good night. Can you imagine what kind of chaos that could be?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
looking at it, people have said, you know what?
What's the zombie apocalypse?
Zombie apocalypse. The Electoral College seems to be working for us. Let's just hang on to it. Maybe this national popular vote thing will happen, and then we'll see if that's good or not. But what the founders wanted to do, and they wanted to build into this system, was a way for the states and a way for the federal government to say, look, what if some nutcase wins the popular vote? And the majority of the people want that. There's got to be some way of putting on the brakes and saying, whoa, we're not going to do that. This cannot happen in our country. And so that system is there, even though now it seems like it's not. The system is there to keep that from happening. And that's what the founders were thinking of. Now, that would not be the case with the national popular vote. So if some, Hitler-esque figure comes in and wins the hearts and minds of the majority of the people and wants to turn America into some sort of militant state, if the national popular vote is in place, then bam, they're in. There's no checks and balances or safeguards. All right, so all of that to say, voting is very important. Elections are very important. You guys are mostly not 18, right? So you can't vote yet.
2 years.
I am a mature and responsible adult.
You're not 18 yet, but there are things you can do. You can get involved. There's different ways you can get involved. You can run for office, obviously not until you're older. Your mommies and daddies can run for office. Oh my goodness, we need people to work in government. If you've ever thought, man, I think I might like to get a job working at the county, whatever office, you had better hope that whoever is sitting in those offices are people that believe in your freedoms. Because if they're not, they can wreak havoc in your life. And I'm talking about at the county level, the state level. I listened to tapes of a phone call where somebody had called the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, and this was a person that had a charity. And this person at the IRS, the people that do the taxes, was trying to tell this person that, well, you can't impose your religious views on somebody else. And they're like, well, wait a minute, we're a religious organization. That's what we do. We talk about religious stuff. Yeah, but you can't do that and be under IRS rules. And it was really kind of shocking. It made me realize, wait a minute. You got to have people at all levels of government that really value individual liberty, or it can all go really, really badly, regardless of who's the governor or who's the president. So if you want to work in government, by all means, work in government. You can work in a campaign. Now, all you guys could do that, and I've done it too. You may have done it.
Ted Cruz.
Now, that is hard work too, because I'm a political junkie. This is what I love. But we lived in Florida for a while, and it was August, and I'm going door to door in August in Florida. Hey, vote for this guy. And this was a state level election, not even federal level. And it was hot, and I was like, man, I don't like this. And then I realized, wait a minute. If it's hard for me, who's really passionate about this stuff, why would anybody else want to do this? But you can. You can work in a campaign, and you can have a big influence on what happens. You can donate. You've all heard about money in politics. Oh, there's too much money in politics. But if you wanted to launch a new candy bar, statewide, just in the state of Tennessee, I'm going to launch a new candy bar. You'd have to have millions of dollars to advertise it, television ads, radio ads. If somebody wants to run for Senate across the whole state of Tennessee or governor, they got to have a lot of money, because you got to spend a lot of money on advertisement, yard signs, T-shirts, all that stuff. And people say, well, it's not good for people to donate to candidates because they're having to get money. But do you want just the wealthy person that can pay for it all themselves? Then only the wealthy people would be able to run for office. So if a guy like me, hey, I want to be governor. Can you help me run for governor? So you invest your money in this cause that you believe in. And you allow somebody that doesn't have a lot of money themselves to get into a position to lead. And then finally, once you become 18, at least vote. Because that's one thing that the founders said, you know what, we're going to let everybody participate. We want everybody to have some voice, at least, in how the country is run.
America, they can vote? Is that what you're saying?
And that's it. Elections in America. All right. Does anybody have any questions? I figured you would have a question. What about you in the blue shirt right here? What's your name? Maddox, good to meet you.
How can you get a job in doing campaigning?
Oh, great question. Great question. You can do one of two things. What I did when I got started was I called the local Republican Party, and I said, hey, I want to get involved and help somebody out in an election. They said, well, hey, why don't you go help Pat Williams? He's running for state representative. So I went to Pat Williams' campaign headquarters, and I said, hey, I want to help out. And they said, here, stuff these envelopes. Or here, go door to door. Here's a list of people to go knock on and give them a piece of literature. It's very easy. Or if you know somebody that's thinking about or that's running for office, you can say, hey, how can I help? And they've always got stuff to do. They always need help. It's fun. Oh, it's a lot of fun. All right, anybody else?
I have several questions, but I'll start with one right now.
Okay.
Can you explain to us the results of the Tennessee primary that took place a couple of weeks ago?
Okay.
And explain the implications of today's primaries, the ones that are happening in 4 or 5 states today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Iowa, New Hampshire, you hear about these a lot. These are the first states that have primaries, and all the people go there and try to get to win their votes. In Tennessee on Super Tuesday, which we call Super Tuesday because there's so many primaries going on that one day, this was to choose the Democrat candidate for president and the Republican candidate for president. So that's what, the Democrat Party of Tennessee is going to want this person to be president. The Republican Party of Tennessee wants this person to be president. The Green Party, whatever. And so that's what was on the ballots. So when you went to the polling place, you had to choose. I want to vote in the Democrat primary or the Republican primary. Some states you don't have to choose. It's called an open primary. But you had to go in there and choose and say, okay, this is the person, Mitt Romney, not Mitt Romney, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Ben Carson, whoever, Kasich, Rubio, and you choose. And so then that party says, all right, State Election Commission, this is the candidate we want on the ballot in November for the Republican Party. And Trey Hargett goes, okay, I hear you, and that's who we're going to put on the ballot for the Republicans. On the Democrat side, Hillary, Bernie Sanders, those other guys that were up there. And so that goes on the ballot. So that's how the State Election Commission decides who's going to be on the primary or the general election ballot. Does that make sense? And then the same thing happens in other states.
What are the implications of today? People are saying this.
Right.
Primary today.
Okay, so they take the popular votes in those states and they say, wow, this many Democrats voted in this election and this many Republicans voted in this election. This means that this state is going to go Republican, which means that, and then most Republicans wanted Ted Cruz to be the president or Donald Trump. That means, in all likelihood, on election day in the general election, this state is going to go for Ted or Donald Trump. So then they can take that and go, okay, that's 11 certain electoral votes for Donald Trump or whoever. And then they do that with all the states. This state's going to go Democrat, based on voter turnout in the primary elections and who the Democrats in that state want to be the candidate. This is going to definitely be a Democrat state. It's going to go for Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or whatever. So we can put that in that column. So they can kind of start to guess. So that's what's happening now with Trump winning all these primaries and Cruz winning these and Hillary winning these and Sanders winning these. They can start to get a picture. And then they start to say, wait a minute, look at this state. They have in their primary today, we're going to see, is this state going to be a swing state? Is it going to be a Democrat? Is it going to be Republican? And they can start to see. So as they move along, you'll see these lists, and I don't have a graphic that shows it, but they're kind of saying, okay, we really expect Donald Trump to get this many electoral votes if he's the candidate for president. And we really expect this guy to get this many. And they can start to say, wow, it's really looking like Donald Trump is going to be the Republican candidate for president, or Hillary's going to be the Republican candidate for president. That's what they're looking at now. So as they move through the primaries, those votes start to total up. And if somebody gets a really super clear lead, it doesn't matter how many primaries, Rubio wins Florida, he's not going to be the candidate. Or Cruz wins 3 more primaries, he's still not going to be the candidate when it comes convention time. But they still keep banging away at it just to try to make sure, so maybe they can get enough votes to have some influence at the convention. Does that make sense at all?
Do you think more people come out to vote in the general election than come out in the primary?
Yes.
So even doing that would still be a little skewed because in the general election you're going to have more voters.
Yeah, you're going to have, unless it's an open election where an open primary where you can vote in any one of them. But typically, the Republicans are very concerned to get one certain guy to be their nominee, and the Democrats are really concerned. But the Independents are kind of like, well, I don't know, I don't care. There's not an independent party. So in the general election, the Republicans will come out, the Democrats will come out, and then that big middle group, the 30%, the Independents will come out, and that's the ones that are really trying to sway on that general election day. So there'll be more votes. Yes. You had a question.
Yes. You said all these different things about how the various primary elections they form a picture, but then you also said that the electors can change the votes, and that's happened 27 times in the past. Were those 27 cases important, or were they just because they were so separated and so individual?
Right. Over the course of the 56 elections that we've had since 1796 or whatever it is, it's happened 24, 27 times, but it's only ever been one elector, and it never was enough to impact. Because in most of the elections, the majority is so obvious. It's 360 to 200 and whatever electoral votes. That one more electoral vote is not going to matter either way. So it happens every now and then. And most of the time what happens is, as I look back at them, the electoral vote will be given to the vice presidential candidate for some bizarre reason. Or in what year was it? In one year, an elector withheld their vote and didn't even cast their vote for Al Gore, I think. It was Al Gore, yeah. They didn't even cast their vote.
Like one where you Bush won because he had more of the electoral votes than Al Gore did?
I think it was a different one. I think Al Gore ran. I don't know. We'll have to go look. I'll have to go look that up. And see. Does anybody have a question that? Okay. Go ahead. You have some more questions too, don't you? All right.
So if today's Super Tuesday 2 or something,
Right.
are we to the point in the process where most states have had their primaries? So even though we won't know until the convention the actual candidate, is today the day where we'll start to really see a majority?
Yeah, right. So we're getting to the end of the primary process. States that have their, and that's why there's some, it's kind of like the states that have their primaries toward the end of the process, maybe they have less impact because it's already been decided. Of course, that's the way everything in every election when you vote. But yeah, it's getting close to that. And so, Rubio is just trying so hard to win Florida so he doesn't lose his home state. But even if he wins Florida, he's not going to be the nominee. And Cruz is trying to pull a few more in there. But if they do pull enough in, they can go into the convention with some clout and say, "Hey, Trump, I got some influence here." Because there's a lot of people in that convention hall that support me. You had a question? Yeah, go ahead.
If going into the convention, there's still 4 candidates for a party. If, say, Donald Trump doesn't have over 50%, because it seems like if you're not voting for Donald Trump, then you'll probably vote for Ted Cruz. The other 2 guys, would they still pick Donald Trump even though, because he has the most? Or even though everyone who's voting for Kasich or Rubio would probably vote for Ted Cruz if he was the...
Right, so that's the thing. Going into the primary, anything can happen. Now, traditionally, as it's happened over the years, over the decades, going into the convention, the votes are already set. Everybody pretty much knows who's going to get it. So they have this formal process of casting the votes, and then they make the formal announcement. But if there's not a clear winner, then all bets are off. And I'm telling you, it can be bananas. You'll never know what can happen. There'll be all sorts of politicking. And man, there's already all sorts of politicking that goes on behind the scenes. They're talking to these delegates from the states. The states send delegates to the convention and trying to get them to vote for so-and-so and trying to persuade them. It's really a beautiful process. I mean, it's rough and tumble, but I think it's a beautiful process. But yeah, you could go into the convention if there's not a clear majority, and who knows what might come out of that. Some coalition. It happened with Ford and Reagan at the Republican convention in '76, and Ford came out as the candidate. Even though Reagan was the most popular candidate, Reagan stepped back and said, "You know what? Let's let Gerald Ford go in there." And of course, Ford lost to Carter. Let's let somebody who hasn't asked a question. You in the back, and you hang on. Mammoth. Yeah.
Has there ever been a tie for president?
No, there hasn't. And that's one thing they talk about. The advantage of the Electoral College is that there's usually a clear winner, except for in 2000. There's usually a clear winner. This guy has way more Electoral College votes. Because you could get down to where you had a really close... You don't want the presidential election coming down to 1 or 2 votes. And that's what happened in 2000 when they were counting the votes. I don't know if y'all remember adults seeing these people ogling these little, hanging chads and all that stuff. But there's never been a clear tie. And if there was a tie, the House of Representatives elects the president. Did y'all know that?
Yes.
There was an actual tie.
This is kind of like an add-on to that. I've heard someone that, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I've heard someone say that if the presidents are even, they're tied, then the House of Representatives is also an even number of members, so they could be tied.
Hadn't thought about that.
And then it goes down to the Senate or Congress, I think.
No, I think the House of Representatives just keeps voting until they get a clear winner.
Yes,
Yeah.
keep voting
They'll
until-
debate and vote it out. And man, can you imagine there'd be riots in the streets? There'd be riots in the streets if that happened. Does somebody have a question that they want to ask but they're afraid to raise their hand? Anybody? Any shy person? You can whisper your question to your neighbor and then they can ask it for you. You have a question, then I want to get to yours. You have a question.
Can any person run for president?
Yes and no. You have to be a citizen, natural-born citizen of the United States. There's some debate about whether you have to be geographically born citizen of the United States. Ted Cruz was born in Canada, even though his mother is a U.S. citizen. And you have to be 35 years old or older. And there may be some other requirements,
I
but
thought you have to be 40.
35. I think it's 35. Am I right? 35?
34.
Because Kennedy was 37, wasn't he, when he ran? And the vice president and the president have to be from different states. You had one more question, didn't you?
Yeah, this was more silly-ish question. Does the Constitution or whatever says what the requirements for being a president, does it explicitly state that you have to be human?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So,
we could,
in theory,
we could technically elect a term.
an extraterrestrial, if they were native born in the United States, yes. You have a question, then I want to get to your questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so how do you tell them that you want to be president and then start running?
Very good question. Did you hear that? He said, how do you tell them that you want to be president and then start running? Okay, so let's say I want to be president of the United States of America. I start working, let's say I'm a businessman, say like Mitt Romney, or I worked for a senator, U.S. Senator Bill Frist. He was a doctor, okay? And he ran for the Senate. And same sort of process. You start going around to your friends and saying, I think I want to run for president. There was a day when Donald Trump said, I think I'm going to run for president. Hey, Bob, I think I'm going to run for president. Oh, really, Donald? Mitt Romney, the same thing. I'm going to run for president, dang it. So you start talking to people, and then you get in touch with the political party in your state. You start going to meetings. You start getting to know everybody and glad-handing and getting to know them and influencing them and building relationships. And eventually everybody goes, that's a pretty good guy. I think he would be a good president. Or they go, that guy's an idiot, and he would not be a good president. So let's ignore that guy. All right? And so that's how it starts. You just say, I'm going to run for president. And they start looking at your qualifications. And I'm telling you guys, somebody doesn't make it to that level without a lot of people having looked at them and said, I think they might be pretty good. That's a very good question. You had a couple more.
While they're candidating, then where does their money come from? How are they getting an income while they're on the
campaign trail?
Campaign trail for a year.
Well, typically these people, like Ted Cruz is a U.S. Senator, Hillary Clinton is a retired former First Lady, former Senator, so she's got plenty of money. Bernie Sanders is a sitting U.S. Senator, so he has a salary. Donald Trump is independently wealthy, so he doesn't have to worry about money. So they all have to have some source of income. They don't live off the political donations. They can't use that money personally. So the political donations have to go toward campaign expenditures. So they have to have their own source of income. So like in Tennessee, if you wanted to run for the legislature in Tennessee, those guys only make like $30,000 at most per year. So they've got to have some source of income to support themselves while they run for office or while they're serving in office typically. But that's a good question. Did you have another question?
At what point in the process do they say, I'm choosing this person as my vice presidential candidate?
Usually after the convention is over and the parties have decided, yes, the Republican Party is going to support this guy for president. Then they will announce, all right, I'm going to pick so-and-so as my running mate. Now, typically what they'll do is, you'll have a senator or you'll have a person in there from some area, like Donald Trump's from New York. So he's probably going to pick somebody that's not from New York because he wants to bring in those other votes. Or you might pick somebody whose ideology is a little bit different than yours because you want to win that group of people in to support you. Where McCain picked a woman as his running mate because he thought, well, maybe we'll get the conservative women vote, something like that. So there's a lot of debate about how that's picked. In the Kennedy election, Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson hated each other. Lyndon Johnson hated John F. Kennedy, and he did not want to be vice president. But Kennedy knew if he could get Lyndon Johnson in there, then he'd get those Southern votes, Southern Democrat votes. And Johnson knew if I can get in there and be vice president, then I might get to be president someday. And as it turned out, he did. But they hated each other. But they formed a coalition that helped them win the election. Let me get you again.
One more question.
Go ahead.
If Donald Trump, if he were to be president, everyone else didn't want him to be president, what would you do? What most people want him to be president?
Well, it could be bad. It's bad enough now with riots and stuff at the conventions. But if he becomes president, what has happened typically in America is once the big battle is over, once the big Super Bowl of politics is over, everybody goes, you know what, I hate that guy, but he's president. So, okay, I'm going to settle down. I'm going to try again in 4 years. Kind of like at the Olympics. See you in 4 years. You know. Typically, that's what's happened. Now, there is nothing that says that there could not be another civil war. There could not be riots in the streets in Washington. There could not be a coup d'etat. There's nothing in history that says that. If you look at the history of England, every 100 years or so, there's a huge revolution, people killing each other over who's going to be in charge. There's nothing that says that couldn't happen in America. But thankfully, in 240 years, that hasn't happened.
One more question.
Yeah.
If Donald, for example, Donald Trump, since he was from New York, wouldn't he have more of advantage, more votes from New York?
Yeah, New York is a very populous state, so he's automatically going to have that advantage. But there's no guarantee that everybody in New York wants Donald Trump to be president. So, you and then we're going to have to quit.
This question kind of ties into mine. It's just like, if you think if everybody else except Ted Cruz and Donald Trump withdrew from the election for the Republican presidential candidate, do you think Ted Cruz would have enough votes to beat out Donald Trump?
Man, I don't know. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it. But I don't know. Anything can happen at that level. One last question, then we'll be done. Or you can ask her. Go ahead.
Yeah. Me?
No, as long as it's not another alien question.
No,
Go ahead.
What are the, can you write in a candidate? If you get to the
Yes.
polls in November and you don't like anyone who's running on
Yes.
the ballot, can you write in a candidate? What is the process for that, for it to be counted as a viable vote?
Right. You know, at the presidential level, you can write in a candidate. Write-in elections usually happen at the state level, Senate, Congress, House of Representatives. And we had a senator, there was a senator that retired or something not too long ago, and he ran a successful write-in candidacy. There was two parties, and he ran. And he had been the sitting senator for gazillions of years. And somehow he got booted out of office in the primary, and he ran a write-in candidacy and write-in campaign, and he won. But it's extremely rare, very, very rare. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to sign their name to to order a free thing in the mail. Much less to get them to write your name into a candidate ballot, and then it's got to be spelled right, blah blah, blah, legible. So yeah, and I don't know if there's even a process for that at the presidential level because you're dealing with electors and slates of electors. Because if you write in somebody's name and they don't have a slate of electors, what good does it do? But it's possible at most of the other election levels. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, did you learn anything?
Yes.
Can you tell all your friends how the Electoral College works?
Most of my friends are here.
Yeah, but it would take an hour.
Take an hour. All right. Well, you guys have a good day. Thanks for coming out.
I would be interested to hear your thoughts on caucuses versus primaries.
Yep.
Because I've participated in both now.
Yeah.
I don't like caucuses.
Yeah. And
You
most
don't get a choice.
most states have gone away from that.
And the one I was in didn't do it like the picture.
Oh, really?
They
Secret
split
ballots.
they split everybody up into the elementary school various classrooms, and it was based on the majority of your classroom.
Oh, my goodness.
So if the majority in your classroom didn't go, it could have totally swayed the whole majority of the whole group of
Right.
people there just because of the way the classrooms were
Right.
split up. I told my husband I don't like that way at all. That's
It's
unfair.
very, very informal, and it's most states have gone away from caucuses. Iowa, I think, is one of the few. that does.
Colorado.
Colorado,
Still.
yeah.
The other interesting thing that's been different this year, we just got here in June, so this is my first time
Welcome.
voting as a Tennessean. All of my ballots that I've done, like I can't remember the last time I actually went to a poll and had to stand there. Everything's been mailed.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so even the early voting, I missed it because I didn't realize there was like
A precinct
man,
of voting
if you don't
place.
meet this 3 days, dang on, you miss the early bird. I kept
Right,
waiting
right.
for something to come in the mail.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that some places still do like the official thing, and then other places
Every state
you can
does it
mail
different.
in. It's- Yeah.
No, there are mail-in ballots in Tennessee.
Well, how do you do that?
You got to contact the election commission office in the county that you live in.
Okay.
And on Trey Hargan's Secretary of State website,
Okay.
you can find all that information. You can go right down to the county. You can call them. Hey, this is.
Yeah.
Sid.
Give me my mail-in ballot.
And, they'll answer the phone and say, "Hey, this is the Murray County Election Commission."
Yeah, okay.
Tell them what you want to do,
Okay.
and you can get a mail-in ballot. So yeah,
that's good to
Tennessee
know.
is more focused on actually going to the polls.
Well, and I kind of liked that though, because it was more of a system of making sure that everybody, you felt like leaving it, you feel like your vote is actually heard.
In the primary.
Whereas
Very
out there,
concrete.
I definitely did not feel like it was heard a lot of times.
Now the other side of it is we have these two-party systems, Democrats and Republicans. And if, let's say you're a constitutional candidate, we had a lady here in the session yesterday. Her husband was trying to run as a constitutional candidate, and they wouldn't put her husband as a constitutional candidate on the ballot. And she was pretty bad about that. Now, there was no chance in the world he was going to win, but it just seemed wrong that I couldn't at least be on the thing, And the the county election commission coordinates the primary in terms of creating the ballot. So they have to have that cooperation. So that was kind of
I missed your name at the beginning.
Tyler Owens.
Thank you so
Oh, you're
much.
welcome. You're welcome.
It was very, very well done.
Oh, good.
We
Thank
appreciate
you. Y'all learned something, I guess. Are y'all 18 yet, or you?
17, 15.
Pretty close, yeah. All right.
And when we're
Good to meet you guys.
Next one.
Next election, that's right. Oh, yeah.
Next time.
Oh, man, I love it. I love
Thank you.
it.
It was very clear.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I
Did you have another
couple more
question?
questions. Yeah. So what has been the typical Tennessee voter turnout?
No, I don't know. We could look it
Primary,
up.
I've never waited in line to vote here in Murray County until
This last primary?
It was unbelievable.
Let's see. We can find out.
And related to that question, when you show that Tennessee is usually a Republican state, historically it's a Republican
Right.
state, if you're a Democrat, why bother voting? Why don't you
Yes.
feel like my vote will count?
It can feel that way, and that's just the way it goes.
Or do you just have to look at the big picture and eventually if enough of us,
Yes.
not
Now.
us, I'm not a Democrat, but if, enough people start voting that way, then
Mm-hmm.
eventually maybe it'll turn.
Yes. Right now, the swing states are certain states, Colorado, certain states, but that's changed
yellow
over
ones.
the years. Up until 1980-ish, California always voted Republican, but in the 80s they switched, and now they always go Democrat. Florida used to always be Republican, and now it tends to go Democrat. Or no, it's the other way around. It used to be Democrat, now it tends to be Republican. So the swing states change, and so that's why with that concept of the swing state, these little small states can get attention. And candidates will actually go there because there's some chance you might win those 9 Colorado electoral votes. Well, so why else would I go to Colorado in the past? Or if we didn't have that Electoral College process, I don't need those 350,000
right.
people that live in Colorado, or Wyoming or whatever. Let's see. I don't know.
have several books.
Is it?